when 18-year-old Tyler Brennan shoved a stack of books off the new teacher's desk and called her a weak little substitute. The entire classroom erupted in laughter. For 2 years running, no educator had lasted more than 6 weeks under his reign of terror at Lincoln Alternative Academy. His father's city council position made him untouchable. His size made him intimidating. And his crew made him unstoppable. What Tyler didn't know was that the quiet woman standing behind that desk had spent 8 years mastering Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Detroit's most brutal training gyms. What he couldn't see beneath her professional blazer were arms that could submit opponents twice her size. What he never imagined was that his next move would land him unconscious on the classroom floor in front of 20 shocked students with their phones recording every second. In 60 seconds, Tyler Brennan would go from Lincoln Academy's most feared bully to a viral video cautionary tale. And every teacher who'd ever been intimidated by an entitled student would finally see what happens when quiet confidence meets explosive consequences. Have you ever witnessed someone get exactly what they deserved? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes justice comes in the most unexpected packages. The morning air bit sharp and cold as Cassie Blake pulled her decade-old Honda Civic into the faculty parking lot of Lincoln Alternative Academy. The building squatted like a gray concrete bunker against the October sky, its windows covered in security mesh that cast strange shadows across the cracked asphalt. This wasn't the teaching job she dreamed of during her education degree. But after 6 months of rejections and dwindling savings, dreams took a back seat to rent money. At 26, Cassie carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd fought for everything she had. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her simple black blazer concealed lean muscles built through countless hours of training. Growing up in Detroit's roughest neighborhoods, she'd learned early that respect wasn't given, was earned, usually the hard way. Lincoln Alternative Academy served students who'd been expelled, suspended, or otherwise cast out from traditional high schools. It was society's last stop before juvenile detention, a place where kids with anger issues, addiction problems, and family trauma came to either turn their lives around or flame out completely. The teaching position paid barely above minimum wage, but it was a chance to make a difference where it mattered most. Principal Dorothy Hayes met Cassie at the front entrance, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun that matched her perpetually worried expression. At 62, Hayes had run Lincoln for 15 years, watching hundreds of troubled kids cycle through her doors. She'd developed the survival instincts of a prison warden and the compassion of a grandmother, both essential for the job. "Miss Blake, welcome to Lincoln," Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of exhaustion. "I'll be honest with you, this isn't your typical teaching environment. Our students have challenges. The last 3 English teachers didn't make it past their probationary period." As they walked through hallways lined with motivational posters that seemed almost mocking in their cheerfulness, Hayes explained the reality of Lincoln Academy. Most students came from broken homes. Many had been involved with gangs or drugs, and all carried the chip on their shoulder that came from being society's rejects. The school operated on a strict discipline system, but enforcement was inconsistent at best. "Your biggest challenge will be Tyler Brennan and his crew," Hayes warned as they approached classroom B12. Tyler's father is City Councilman Robert Brennan, major donor to the school board. The boy knows he's untouchable, and he uses that knowledge to terrorize anyone he sees as weak. He's got 2 followers who enable his behavior, Jake Morrison and Mason Reeves. Together, they've created a culture of intimidation that affects the entire school. Cassie nodded, absorbing the information while studying the classroom she'd call home. The space was sparse and institutional, with fluorescent lights that hummed constantly and desks scarred by years of frustrated students carving their anger into the metal. But she'd taught summer programs in community centers with gang tags on the wall sat. Least this place had working heat. What Principal Hayes didn't know was that Cassie Blake had been training in mixed martial arts since she was 18. After a brutal mugging left her hospitalized during her freshman year of college, she'd walked into Warrior's Den MMA gym in Detroit and never looked back. 8 years of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and wrestling had transformed her from a victim into someone who could handle herself against opponents twice her size. Her instructor, Marcus "Tank" Williams, was a former UFC fighter who'd taken Cassie under his wing. He taught her that fighting wasn't about aggression or dominance, it was about problem-solving under pressure. Every technique had a purpose. Every movement was calculated. And the strongest weapon was a calm mind in chaotic situations. Violence is a language, Dank always said, but it should be your last resort, not your first response. The real test of a martial artist isn't winning fights, it's avoiding them until you have no other choice. Cassie had earned her black belt 2 years ago in a ceremony that felt more meaningful than her college graduation. She'd proven herself against training partners who outweighed her by 50 pounds, learning to use leverage, technique, and intelligence to overcome raw strength, but she'd never advertised her skills, preferring to let people underestimate her rather than feel threatened by her abilities. The first day of class arrived with the kind of nervous energy that always accompanied new beginnings. Students filtered into classroom B12 with the wariness of animals entering unfamiliar territory. Most kept their heads down, backpacks clutched like shields, eyes darting around to assess potential threats or allies. Then Tyler Brennan strutted through the door. At Aiten, Tyler stood 6 feet 2 inches of artificially inflated confidence. His blonde hair was styled with expensive product. His clothes were designer brands that cost more than most families' monthly grocery budget, and his blue eyes held the cold calculation of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Behind him came his crew, Jake Morrison, a stocky wrestler with arms like tree trunks and a permanent sneer, and Mason Reeves, thin and wiry with the nervous energy of someone always looking for trouble. The trio took seats in the back corner, immediately claiming territory through their body language and loud conversation about their weekend exploits. Other students instinctively shifted away, creating a buffer zone of empty desks around the 3 boys. The message was clear. This was Tyler's domain. And everyone else was just visiting. Cassie watched the dynamics play out while finishing her preparations at the front of the room. She'd seen this behavior pattern before alpha predators, establishing dominance through intimidation and social positioning. In the animal kingdom, such displays usually work to avoid actual conflict. In high school, alternative academies, they were often the prelude to systematic bullying. "All right, let's get started," Cassie announced, her voice carrying enough authority to cut through the chatter. "I'm Miss Blake, and I'll be your English teacher for the rest of the semester. I know you've had some transitions in this class recently, but I'm here to stay." Tyler's laugh cut through her introduction like a knife. "That's what they all say," he called out, not bothering to lower his voice. "Give it 2 weeks. This place eats teachers alive." Several students shifted uncomfortably, while others watched to see how the new teacher would respond. This was the first test how she handled. Tyler's challenge would determine whether she survived at Lincoln Academy or became another casualty in his campaign of intimidation. Cassie paused, meeting Tyler's gaze with steady eyes. "I appreciate your concern for my longevity here, Tyler, but I've taught in tougher places than this. Why don't we focus on what you're going to learn, rather than when I'm going to leave?" "Tougher places?" Jake snorted, flexing his shoulders in a way that made his Letterman jacket strain. "Lady, you look like you just walked out of suburbia. What could you possibly know about tough?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Cassie could feel the entire room holding its breath, waiting to see if she'd back down or escalate. This was the moment that would define her relationship with every student in that classroom and, potentially, her entire tenure at Lincoln Academy. "I know that tough isn't about making noise or intimidating people smaller than you," Cassie replied calmly. "Tough is facing your problems head-on instead of taking them out on others. Tough is pushing through difficulty without blaming everyone else for your situation. And tough is earning respect through your actions, not demanding it through fear." Tyler's face darkened. He wasn't used to teachers who pushed back, especially not female teachers who looked like they belonged in a coffee shop rather than an alternative school. His father's influence had always been enough to make administrators back down, and his physical presence usually intimidated anyone who tried to challenge him. "Respect?" Tyler stood up slowly, using his height advantage to loom over the classroom. "You haven't earned any respect here. Miss Blake, you're just another substitute who thinks she can save us with her inspiring speeches and motivational posters." Mason joined his leader, standing with the kind of twitchy energy that suggested he was looking forward to whatever came next. "Yeah, we've seen your type before. All talk, no action. When things get real, you'll run just like the others. Cassie remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled, and even years of sparring had taught her to read aggression in body language, the subtle shifts in weight, the tensing of muscles, the micro-expressions that preceded violence. Tyler and his crew were postulating, trying to establish dominance through intimidation rather than preparing for actual conflict. They were used to teachers who either cowered or lost their temper, giving them ammunition for complaints to administration. "I understand you're testing me," Cassie said, her voice remaining calm despite the tension crackling through the room. "That's natural when you've been disappointed by adults before. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down, and we're going to have a productive class. Or you're going to continue this behavior and find out that I'm not like the teachers you've dealt with before." The room was dead silent. Other students watched the confrontation with the fascination of bystanders at a car accident, phones discreetly positioned to record whatever happened next. This kind of drama was rare entertainment at Lincoln Academy, where most excitement came from fights in the hallway or drug busts in the parking lot. Tyler smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Are you threatening us, Miss Blake? Because that would be very unprofessional. My father might have some concerns about teachers who can't maintain appropriate boundaries with students." It was a calculated, move-the-veiled threat of political consequences wrapped in fake concern about professionalism. Tyler had used this tactic before, weaponizing his father's influence to escape accountability while painting himself as the victim of aggressive faculty. Cassie nodded slowly, recognizing the strategy. "You're absolutely right, Tyler. Threats would be unprofessional. That's why I'm making you a promise instead. As long as you're in my classroom, you'll treat yourself and your classmates with respect. If you can't do that, then we'll have a different kind of conversation." "What kind of conversation?" Jake demanded, cracking his knuckles in what he probably thought was an intimidating display. "You gonna call our parents? Send us to the principal? We've heard it all before." "Lady." Before Cassie could respond, Tyler held up a hand to silence his friend. He was studying the new teacher with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up potential prey. Something about her demeanor wasn't matching his expectations. She wasn't showing the fear or anger that usually accompanied his intimidation tactics. "You know what, Miss Blake?" Tyler said, his voice taking on a mock-friendly tone. "I like you. You've got more backbone than the last few teachers. But here's the thing. Backbone only gets you so far when you're in over your head." He began walking slowly toward the front of the classroom, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Other students seemed to shrink in their seats, creating an invisible path between Tyler and his target. This was familiar territory for him, the moment when resistance crumbled and authority figures revealed their fundamental powerlessness. "See, what you don't understand is that this isn't a normal school with normal rules," Tyler continued, now close enough that Cassie had to look up to meet his eyes. "This is Lincoln Academy, where the kids are here because the system couldn't handle us. And if the system couldn't handle us, what makes you think one little substitute teacher can?" Cassie remained perfectly still, her hands relaxed at her sides despite every instinct screaming at her to shift into a defensive stance. Tyler was close enough now that she could smell his expensive cologne and see the cruel amusement dancing in his eyes. He was enjoying this, the psychological pressure, the power dynamic. The audience of intimidated students watching his dominance display. "I think you're right about one thing," Cassie said quietly. "This isn't a normal school, but you're wrong about something else. I'm not here to handle you, Tyler. I'm here to teach you. There's a difference." Tyler laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to bounce off the institutional walls. "Teach me, lady? The only thing you're going to teach me is how fast a teacher can quit when things get uncomfortable." He reached out toward Cassie's desk, his movement deliberate and invasive. It was a power play establishing his right to invade her space, to touch her belongings, to demonstrate that her authority was meaningless in his domain. His fingers moved toward a stack of papers, intent on scattering them across the floor in a display of casual destruction. That's when everything changed. Cassie's hand moved with fluid precision, intercepting Tyler's wrist in a grip that looked gentle but felt like a steel trap. Her fingers found the pressure point at the base of his thumb, applying just enough force to send a sharp message through his nervous system. To observers, it appeared as though she'd simply caught his hand, but Tyler felt the unmistakable sensation of controlled power. "I asked you to return to your seat," Cassie said, her voice still calm, but carrying an undertone of authority that hadn't been there before. "This is me asking nicely." Tyler tried to pull his hand away and discovered that he couldn't. Cassie's grip wasn't painful, but it was absolutely immovable. Her fingers seemed to know exactly where to apply pressure to neutralize his strength without causing visible damage. For the first time in his life, Tyler Brennan found himself physically controlled by someone he'd underestimated. "Let go of me," he hissed, trying to maintain his composure while panic flickered in his eyes. "You can't put your hands on students. That's assault." Cassie smiled slightly, expression that contained more steel than warmth. "This is a control technique designed to prevent aggressive behavior without causing harm. I learned it in my self-defense training. Would you like me to demonstrate the difference between this and actual force?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake and Mason had risen from their seats, uncertain whether to intervene or retreat. Other students were openly recording now. Phones pointed at the confrontation with the anticipation of viral content. The entire room balanced on the edge of chaos, waiting to see who would blink first. Tyler's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been fear. He'd never encountered an adult who could physically control him without apparent effort, especially not a woman who looked like she should be teaching kindergarten in the suburbs. His worldview of power dynamics was cracking in real time. "You're making a mistake," Tyler said, his voice strained as he continued trying to free his wrist. "My father will have your job for this. You have no idea who you're messing with." Cassie maintained her grip while studying Tyler's face. 8 years of martial arts training had taught her to read opponents' their tells, their breaking points, their moments of vulnerability. Tyler was used to intimidating people through size and social pressure, but he'd never learned to handle someone who wasn't impressed by either. "Your father isn't here," Cassie said quietly. "This is between you and me, and right now, you have a choice. You can continue escalating this situation and discover exactly how much control I have, or you can step back, sight down, and let me teach this class." The grip demonstration had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had fundamentally altered the power dynamic in classroom B12. Students who'd never seen Tyler back down were watching with amazement and growing excitement. The school's untouchable bully was being physically controlled by a teacher who looked like she'd never hurt a fly. Jake took a step forward, his wrestler's instincts telling him to help his friend. "Hey, let him go right now, or we're going to have a problem." Cassie's eyes flicked to Jake without releasing Tyler's wrist. "We already have a problem, Jake. The question is whether you want to make it worse or better. I'm trained to handle multiple opponents, and unlike your friend here, I actually know what I'm doing." The statement was delivered with such casual confidence that Jake actually took a step backward. There was something in Cassie's tone, a quiet certainty that suggested she wasn't bluffing about her capabilities. Mason fidgeted nervously, clearly out of his depth in a situation that had moved beyond psychological intimidation into potential physical confrontation. Tyler's breathing had become shallow as he processed the reality of his situation. For 18 years, his combination of size, wealth, and political connections had made him untouchable. Teachers feared him, administrators protected him, and other students gave him a wide berth. The idea that someone could neutralize his advantages so easily was both humiliating and terrifying. "Fine," Tyler said through gritted teeth. "You made your point. Let me go, and I'll sit down." Cassie studied his face for a moment, reading the sincerity behind his words. Slowly, she released his wrist, her hand moving back to her side with controlled precision. Tyler immediately stepped back, rubbing his wrist where her fingers had been, his eyes never leaving her face. "Thank you," Cassie said simply. "Now, let's try this again. Everyone, please take your seats so we can begin today's lesson." Tyler returned to his corner, his crew flanking him like confused bodyguards. The entire dynamic of the classroom had shifted in those 30 seconds. Students sat up straighter. Phones disappeared, and the attention focused on the front of the room with an intensity that hadn't existed before. But Cassie could see the calculation in Tyler's eyes. This wasn't over, it was just beginning. He'd been publicly challenged and controlled, his reputation damaged in front of his followers, and the broader student body. For someone whose identity was built on dominance and intimidation, such a loss couldn't be tolerated. As she began her lesson on conflict resolution in literatura, choice that felt increasingly appropriate, Cassie remained hyper-aware of the three boys in the back corner. Their whispered conversations and angry glances told her that Tyler was already planning his retaliation. She'd wanted to make a difference at Lincoln Academy. Now she realized she might have to fight for the chance to do so. The remainder of the class period passed with unusual quiet. Students who'd never paid attention in English class found themselves engaged in discussions about character, motivation, and moral choices. Without Tyler's constant disruption, other voices emerged, kids who had insights to share, but had never felt safe expressing them. Maria Santos, a quiet junior with artistic talents, shared her interpretation of a poem about overcoming adversity. David Chen, usually sullen and withdrawn, made a thoughtful comment about how conflict revealed true character. Even some of Tyler's usual followers seemed more relaxed without the constant pressure to perform loyalty through cruelty. But Tyler himself remained silent, his blue eyes tracking Cassie's every movement, like a predator studying prey. She could feel his attention like a physical weight, the promise of future confrontation hanging in the air between them. When the bell rang, students filed out with the usual chaos of teenagers, freed from academic obligation. Tyler and his crew were among the last to leave, moving with deliberate slowness, as if to demonstrate that they weren't fleeing the scene of their humiliation. As Tyler passed Cassie's desk, he paused, just long enough to whisper, "This isn't over." Cassie met his gaze without flinching. "I know," she replied quietly, "but you might want to think carefully about what comes next." After the room emptied, Cassie sat alone among the scattered desks and fluorescent hum, processing what had just occurred. She'd revealed more of her capabilities than she'd intended, but Tyler's aggression had forced her hand. Now she faced a choice: retreat from the conflict and potentially lose all credibility, or prepare for an escalation that could jeopardize her career and safety. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Tank Williams. "How's the new job treating you, champ?" Cassie smiled grimly as she typed back. "Might need to dust off some old skills. Remember what you taught me about dealing with multiple opponents?" Tank's response came quickly. "Stay calm, trust your training, and remember the best fighters win before the first punch is thrown. You got this." As Cassie packed her materials and prepared for her next class, she could hear Tyler's voice echoing in the hallway, already spinning the narrative of what had happened. By lunch, every student in Lincoln Academy would know that the new English teacher had physically controlled their most feared bully. The question was, what would Tyler do about it? The answer came sooner than expected. During her lunch break, Cassie received a call to report to Principal Hayes' office immediately. Tyler had already made his move, but instead of going through official channels, he'd chosen a more personal approach. When Cassie arrived at the administrative office, she found Robert Brennan, city councilman and Tyler's father, seated across from Principal Hayes' desk. At 52, Robert Brennan carried himself with the smooth confidence of a career politician, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his expensive suit tailored to project authority. "Miss Blake?" Principal Hayes said, her voice tight with stress. "Councilman Brennan has some concerns about an incident in your classroom this morning." Robert Brennan stood as Cassie entered, extending his hand with practiced political charm. "Miss Blake, I'm Robert Brennan, Tyler's father. I understand there was some kind of altercation between you and my son today." Cassie shook his hand, noting the firm grip designed to project dominance. "Mr. Brennan, there was a classroom management situation that I handled appropriately. Tyler was disrupting the learning environment, and I used approved techniques to de-escalate the situation." Brennan's smile remained in place, but his eyes hardened. "Tyler tells me you physically restrained him without cause, potentially causing injury. That's a serious allegation." "Miss Blake, putting hands on students is a liability issue that could expose the school district to significant legal consequences." Principal Hayes shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Cassie could see the calculation in the older woman's eyes, weighing the value of one probationary teacher against the political and financial influence of Robert Brennan. It was a battle Cassie was likely to lose unless she could change the terms of engagement. I understand your concern, Mr. Brennan, Cassie said calmly. Perhaps we should review the security footage from my classroom. I'm confident it will show that I used minimal, appropriate force to prevent Tyler from destroying school property and disrupting the educational environment. Brennan's smile flickered. Security footage? Yes. Every classroom at Lincoln Academy is equipped with surveillance cameras for safety and security purposes. Cassie continued, the lie rolling smoothly off her tongue. I'm sure Principal Hayes can arrange for us to review the relevant footage together. Principal Hayes blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard by Cassie's confidence, but she was experienced enough to recognize a lifeline when she saw one. Of course. We can certainly review any available footage before making any decisions about disciplinary action. Robert Brennan's political instincts told him something was wrong, but he couldn't challenge the existence of security footage without revealing his son's version of events might be unreliable. I see. Well, I trust that any review will be thorough. Absolutely. Cassie agreed. I'm confident that any objective review will show that I acted appropriately in a challenging situation. Tyler is welcome to return to my class anytime he's ready to participate constructively in the learning environment. The meeting ended with carefully worded promises to investigate further, but Cassie could see she'd bought herself time. Robert Brennan left with his political smile intact but obvious frustration in his eyes. Principal Hayes waited until the door closed before turning to Cassie with a mixture of admiration and concern. Miss Blake, I hope you know what you're doing. Hayes said quietly. The Brennan family has significant influence in this district. If Tyler's version of events gains traction, I understand the politics. Principal Hayes, Cassie replied, but I also understand that backing down from bullies, whether they're students or their parents only, makes the problem worse. Tyler needs to learn that actions have consequences, and his father needs to learn that political influence can't override basic accountability. As Cassie returned to her classroom for the afternoon sessions, she knew the real battle was just beginning. Tyler would be back, probably with a more sophisticated plan, and definitely with wounded pride driving him toward escalation. But for the first time since accepting the position at Lincoln Academy, Cassie felt like she might actually make a difference here. She had 8 years of martial arts training, a determination forged in Detroit's toughest neighborhoods, and a growing conviction that some fights were worth having regardless of the personal cost. Tyler Brennan thought he'd found another teacher to break. Instead, he'd awakened something in Cassie Blake that had been dormant since her fighting days. The question now was whether Lincoln Academy was ready for the storm that was coming. As students filed into her afternoon classes, Cassie noticed the change in atmosphere. Word had spread through the school's social networks faster than wildfire, and she could see the mixture of curiosity, excitement, and anticipation in their faces. For many of these kids, watching someone stand up to Tyler Brennan was like witnessing David face Goliath, an impossible scenario they'd never dared to imagine. But as the final bell rang and students headed for buses and cars, Cassie received a text message that made her blood run cold. Parking lot? 5 minutes. Come alone if you want to keep this between us. The message came from an unknown number, but Cassie had no doubt who'd sent it. Tyler Brennan was done with classroom confrontations and political maneuvering. He wanted a direct resolution to their conflict. Away from cameras and witnesses, Cassie looked out her classroom window at the nearly empty parking lot, calculating odds and options. She could ignore the message, report it to administration, or meet Tyler on his terms. Each choice carried risks, but only one offered the possibility of ending this conflict permanently. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door, her martial arts training automatically shifting her mind into combat mode. After 8 years of preparation, Cassie Blake was finally going to find out if her skills could handle a real-world test. The parking lot showdown was about to begin. The October wind cut through the nearly empty parking lot as Cassie Blake stepped outside Lincoln Alternative Academy. Most students had caught their buses home, leaving behind scattered trash and the faint smell of teenage rebellion. Her Honda Civic sat alone in the faculty section, but she could see Tyler Brennan's expensive BMW parked near the far corner, flanked by Jake Morrison's lifted pickup truck and Mason Reeves' motorcycle. They'd chosen their ground carefully away from the building's security cameras, hidden behind a row of maintenance dumpsters where no administrator would accidentally witness what was about to unfold. It was a classic bully tactic: isolate the target, control the environment, and ensure no authority figures could intervene. As Cassie walked across the cracked asphalt, her breathing automatically shifted into the controlled rhythm. Marcus Tank Williams had drilled into her for 8 years. Her hands hung loose at her sides, but her muscle memory was already calculating distances, angles, and escape routes. This wasn't a sparring session in a controlled gym. This was the real world, where mistakes could cost more than points. Tyler emerged from behind the dumpsters first. His designer jacket unzipped to reveal the muscular frame that had intimidated countless teachers and students. Jake and Mason flanked him like attack dogs awaiting orders, their body language radiating the casual violence of young men who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. "I have to admit, Miss Blake," Tyler called out, his voice carrying across the empty lot, "you've got bigger balls than I expected." Most teachers would have run straight to the principal after getting that text. Cassie stopped, about 15 feet away, close enough to hear clearly, far enough to react if they rushed her. "What do you want, Tyler? If this is about this morning, we can discuss it like adults in Principal Hayes' office." Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Adults, lady? You embarrassed me in front of my entire class. You put your hands on me like I was some punk kid you could push around. That doesn't get handled in an office, that gets handled right here. Right now." Jake cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "My dad always told me that when someone disrespects you, you make sure it never happens again. Seems like our teacher needs to learn some respect. She needs to learn her place," Mason added, his nervous energy making him bounce slightly on his toes. "Just because you know some karate moves doesn't mean you can mess with us. This isn't some suburban dojo." "Sweetheart," Cassie remained perfectly still, her eyes tracking all 3 boys while her mind processed tactical information. Tyler was the largest and probably strongest, but his movements suggested someone used to intimidating rather than fighting. Jake had a wrestler's build and stance. He'd be the most dangerous in close quarters. Mason was wiry and unpredictable, likely to do something stupid that could escalate the situation beyond control. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away," Cassie said quietly. "Go back to your cars, drive home, and we'll pretend this never happened. But if you take one more step toward me, everything changes." Tyler's face darkened with anger. "You still think you're in control here? Look around. Teacher, it's 3 against 1. No cameras, no witnesses. By the time security finds you, we'll be long gone. And you'll be explaining to the hospital why you thought you could take on 3 guys half your age." "Half my age?" Cassie smiled slightly. "Tyler, I'm 26. You're 18. Let's at least get the math right before you do something you'll regret." The casual correction seemed to enrage Tyler more than any insult could have. He'd spent 2 years building his reputation on fear and intimidation, convincing himself and others that he was untouchable. Having a woman who looked like she belonged in a suburban coffee shop mock his basic arithmetic struck at the core of his inflated self-image. "That's it. Tuller snarl." Starting forward, Jake, Mason's around hair. Time to teach Miss Karate a lesson about reality. The 3 boys began moving with the coordination of a pack, trying to flank Cassie and limit her mobility. It was a tactic that had probably worked on other victim Seuss numbers and positioning to create an overwhelming sense of helplessness, but Cassie Blake wasn't other victims. As Tyler approached from the front and Jake circled to her left, Cassie's training kicked in with the automaticity of years of repetition. She shifted her weight to the balls of her feet, lowered her center of gravity slightly, and let her hands drift into a ready position that looked casual but prepared her for explosive movement. "Last warning," she said, her voice carrying a new edge that made Mason hesitate. "Walk away now." Tyler was close enough now that she could smell his expensive cologne, mixed with the adrenaline sweat of impending violence. "Make me," he growled, reaching out to grab her shoulder. Cassie moaned. Tyler's hand was still 6 inches from her blazer when she pivoted on her back foot, used his forward momentum against him, and executed a perfect hip toss that sent all 200 pounds of him crashing into the asphalt. The technique was so smooth and effortless that for a moment, Jake and Mason couldn't process what they'd witnessed. Tyler hit the ground hard, his expensive jacket tearing as he scraped across the rough surface. Before he could recover, Cassie had already reset her position, facing the remaining two attackers with the calm confidence of someone who just demonstrated the difference between athletic training and actual fighting skills. Holy shit, Mason breathed, his eyes wide with shock. Did she just? Jake, his wrestler's instincts overriding his surprise, charged forward with a double-leg takedown attempt. In high school wrestling, it was a devastating move that had earned him a state championship. Against someone with 8 years of Brazilian jiu-jitsu training, it was a gift. Cassie sprawled backward, defending the takedown, while simultaneously wrapping her arm around Jake's neck in a guillotine choke. As his forward momentum carried them both toward the ground, she used his own weight to tighten the submission. Within seconds, Jake was trapped in a hold that cut off blood flow to his brain, not enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to make the world go dark very quickly. "Jake!" Mason screamed, finally jolting into action. "Let him go." But Jake was already going limp, his struggles becoming weaker as the choke took effect. Cassie maintained the hold for another few seconds, long enough to ensure he was unconscious, but not long enough to cause lasting harm, then released him and rolled away as his body went slack. Tyler was struggling to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. "You crazy bitch, you could have killed him?" "He's fine," Cassie replied calmly, already repositioning to face the remaining threats. "He'll wake up in about 30 seconds with nothing worse than a headache and a bruised ego. Unlike what you three were planning to do to me." Mason looked between his unconscious friend and his humiliated leader, uncertainty replacing his earlier bravado. "Tyler, man, maybe we should." "Shoot up," Tyler roared. "I don't care what kind of kung fu garbage she knows. She's still just one person, and I'm twice her size." He rushed forward again, this time throwing wild punches with the desperation of someone whose entire identity was crumbling in real time. But rage made him sloppy, and size meant nothing. When technique was applied correctly, Cassie slipped his first punch, deflected his second, and stepped inside his guard to deliver a precise elbow strike to his solar plexus. The blow folded Tyler in half, driving all the air from his lungs and dropping him to his knees on the cold asphalt. As he gasped for breath, Cassie circled behind him and applied a rear-naked choke, the same technique she'd used on Jake. But with Tyler's consciousness hanging by a thread, "This can end right now," she whispered in his ear. "All you have to do is say you're sorry and promise to leave me and every other teacher alone. Or I can put you to sleep like your friend and let you wake up with 20 students recording you getting choked out by the woman you thought you could intimidate." Tyler's hands clawed uselessly at her arm. But 8 years of training had taught Cassie exactly how to apply pressure to minimize his leverage. His face was turning red, his breathing becoming labored, and his struggles were growing weaker by the second. "I'm sorry," he gasped out, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. Okay, just let me go." But Cassie had heard insincere apologies before. "Sorry for what? Tyler? Be specific." For being a jerk in class. For threatening you. For bringing you out here." His words came in desperate bursts as his oxygen supply dwindled. "Please. I can't breathe." "And what happens tomorrow?" Cassie pressed, maintaining just enough pressure to keep him compliant. "Do you go back to bullying teachers and terrorizing other students?" "No." Tyler's voice cracked with genuine fear. "No. I swear. I'll leave everyone alone. I'll be good in class. Whatever you want." Mason watched in horror as his invincible leader begged for mercy from the woman they'd planned to assault. His phone was in his hand, but instead of calling for help, he found himself recording the moment, partly from shock, partly from a growing realization that he was witnessing something that would change Lincoln Academy forever. Cassie held the choke for another few seconds, making sure Tyler understood the reality of his situation, then released him and stepped back. Tyler collapsed forward, coughing and gasping, his hands massaging his throat as he struggled to process what had just happened. Jake was beginning to stir, groaning softly as consciousness returned. Mason helped him sit up, both boys staring at Cassie with a mixture of fear and awe that they'd never experienced before. "Here's what's going to happen," Cassie announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just proven their capabilities beyond any doubt. "You three are going to get in your cars and drive home. Tomorrow, you're going to come to my class ready to learn. You're going to treat me and every other teacher with respect, and you're going to stop terrorizing other students." Tyler looked up from his position on the ground, his expensive clothes torn and dirty, his ego shattered beyond repair. "You can't tell us what to do. Your father isn't here." Cassie cut him off. "And if you think Councilman Brennan wants security footage of his son getting submitted by a woman half his size going viral on social media, you're even dumber than your grades suggest." She gestured toward Mason's phone, which was still recording. "How many followers do you have on Instagram?" "Mason? Because I guarantee this video gets more views than anything you've ever posted." Mason looked down at his phone in shock, realizing he'd been documenting their complete humiliation. I wasn't gonna post it. You were just recording evidence of 3 male students attempting to assault a female teacher in a school parking lot." Cassie finished, "Which is probably a felony in this state. So here's my offer. Delete that video. Convince your friends to act like civilized human beings. And we'll pretend this never happened. Or keep it. Show it around. And explain to the police how you planned an ambush assault on school property." The 3 boys exchanged glances, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. They'd come here expecting to intimidate and possibly assault a teacher they perceived as weak. Instead, they'd been systematically dismantled by someone who'd been training for this exact scenario for 8 years. Tyler struggled to his feet, his movements careful and pained. "This isn't over," he muttered. But the words lacked any conviction. Cassie stepped closer, and Tyler instinctively flinched backward. "Yes, it is," she said quietly, "because if you ever threaten me or any other teacher again, if you ever lay hands on another student, if you even look at someone wrong in my classroom, I will make what just happened here feel like a gentle hug. Do you understand me?" Tyler nodded mutely, unable to meet her eyes. Jake and Mason helped him toward his BMW, moving like beaten dogs, with their tails between their legs. As they reached their cars, Cassie called out one final time, "And Tyler, if your father wants to discuss this situation, tell him I'm happy to meet with him and Principal Hayes. I'm sure he'd love to hear about his son's extracurricular activities." The 3 boys drove away in silence, leaving Cassie alone in the parking lot with the setting sun and the satisfaction of a job well done. She walked to her Honda Civic, her breathing still controlled, her hands steady as she unlocked the door. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Tank Williams. "How'd the first day go?" "Champ?" Cassie smiled as she typed back. "Had to remind some students about respect. Nothing I couldn't handle." Tank's response came immediately. "That's my girl. Remember, the real victory isn't winning the fight. It's preventing the next one." As Cassie drove home through the suburban Denver streets, she reflected on what had just occurred. She'd come to Lincoln Alternative Academy hoping to make a difference in troubled kids' lives through education and compassion. Instead, she'd been forced to use violence to establish the basic respect necessary for learning to occur. But sometimes, she realized, the most important lessons couldn't be found in any textbook. The next morning brought a transformation that shocked everyone at Lincoln Academy. Tyler Brennan arrived early, took a seat in the front row of Cassie's classroom, and spent the entire period participating constructively in discussions about conflict resolution in literature. Jake and Mason flanked him, equally subdued and respectful. Other students noticed the change immediately. The 3 most feared bullies in school had become model students overnight, and everyone wanted to know why. Rumors spread like wildfire, some claiming Cassie had called their parents, others suggesting she'd caught them with drugs or weapons. The truth was simpler and more powerful. They'd learned that actions have consequences, and some people couldn't be intimidated no matter how much money or influence backed you up. Principal Hayes noticed the change too, stopping by Cassie's classroom during lunch to express her amazement. "Miss Blake, I don't know what you did, but Tyler Brennan actually thanked me this morning for hiring you. In 15 years, I've never seen such a complete turnaround." Cassie smiled, not bothering to explain the details. Sometimes students just need to understand that there are adults who won't back down from doing what's right. By the end of the week, word had spread throughout the entire school district. Lincoln Alternative Academy, long considered a dumping ground for irredeemable troublemakers, was experiencing a cultural shift. Students felt safer, teachers felt empowered, and even the most hardened behavioral problems were reconsidering their approach to education. Tyler Brennan never spoke about what happened in that parking lot, but his transformation spoke volumes. He started tutoring younger students, joined the conflict resolution club, and even convinced his father to fund an anti-bullying program for the district. Sometimes the most powerful lessons came not from books or lectures, but from the simple demonstration that strength without wisdom was meaningless, that respect was earned through actions rather than fear, and that the quietest people often carried the loudest truths. Cassie Blake had come to Lincoln Academy as just another substitute teacher. She'd leave as a legend, the woman who proved that sometimes the best way to stop a bully was to show them what real strength looked like. And in classroom B12, students continued to learn that the most important battles weren't won with fists or intimidation, but with courage, principle, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserved respect, even those who'd forgotten how to give it. Have you ever seen someone get the reality check they desperately needed? Sometimes the universe has a way of delivering justice in the most unexpected packages. Drop your thoughts below, because we all love stories where the underdog shows the world what real strength looks like.